In 1986, the United States government sold over 2,000 missiles to Iran, the same Iran that had held American hostages for 444 days, the same Iran officially designated a state sponsor of terrorism. Then they took the profits and funneled them to Nicaraguan rebels that Congress had explicitly forbidden the government from supporting. That's not interpretation. That's not conspiracy theory. That's the documented finding of a congressional investigation, confirmed by a special prosecutor, admitted under by the officials who did it. And somehow everyone walked away free. How does a government break its own laws, lie to Congress, sell weapons to enemies, fund an illegal war, and face zero consequences? The evidence trail on this one leads to the Oval Office. The question is whether anyone in power wanted to follow it. The Iran-Contra scandal sits in a strange category of American history, fully documented, partially prosecuted, and almost completely forgotten. But the institutional precedents it set still shape how the executive branch operates today. To understand what happened, you have to understand two separate illegal operations that someone decided to connect. First, the Contras. In Nicaragua, a leftist government had taken power in 1979. The Reagan administration wanted them gone, so the CIA began funding and training a rebel army, the Contras, to overthrow them. By 1982, Congress got nervous. Reports emerged of Contra forces committing atrocities against civilians. So Congress passed the Boland Amendment, which explicitly prohibited the CIA, the Defense Department, or any other government agency from providing military support to the Contras. The law was clear. The president signed it. And then the National Security Council ignored it. Oliver North, a Marine lieutenant colonel working in the NSC, became the point man for keeping the Contra operation alive despite the congressional ban. He solicited donations from foreign governments. Saudi Arabia contributed $32 million. He coordinated with private fundraisers. He set up shell companies and Swiss bank accounts, all while Congress believed the operation had stopped. Second, the Iran arms sales. In the mid-80s, American hostages were being held in Lebanon by Hezbollah, which had ties to Iran. The Reagan administration, despite publicly refusing to negotiate with terrorists, secretly began selling weapons to Iran through Israeli intermediaries. The theory was that Iran would pressure Hezbollah to release hostages. This violated the Arms Export Control Act, it violated the administration's own stated policy, and it put American weapons in the hands of a government we had designated as an enemy. Here's where it gets creative. Someone, and the evidence strongly suggests Oliver North, realized the Iran arms sales were generating profits, millions of dollars that existed in overseas accounts, off the books, invisible to congressional oversight. North took those profits and diverted them to fund the Contras. Two illegal operations combined into one elegant scheme that bypassed every check Congress had established. The scandal broke in November 1986 when a Lebanese newspaper published reports of the arms sales. Within weeks, North and his secretary Fawn Hall were feeding documents into a shredder at the White House. Not metaphorically, literally standing at a shredder, destroying evidence as investigators closed in. Hall later testified that she helped alter documents and smuggled others out in her clothing. Attorney General Edwin Meese announced an investigation, but before the investigation could proceed, North shredded so many documents that the full scope of the operation may never be known. His own notebooks, which survived, detailed hundreds of meetings, transactions, and decisions. The gaps in the documentary record aren't accidental. They're the result of deliberate destruction between when the scandal broke and when investigators secured the evidence. So what did President Reagan know? This is where the official narrative and the evidence diverge. The official position? Reagan approved the arms sales to Iran, but didn't know about the diversion of funds to the Contras. The Iran-Contra affair was a rogue operation run by overzealous staffers who exceeded their authority. The president was out of the loop on the illegal parts. Reagan's own testimony was, to put it mildly, vague. In his deposition for the trial of National Security Advisor John Poindexter, Reagan said, "I don't recall," or "I can't remember," 130 times. 130 times. Either the President of the United States had a memory that would concern any neurologist, or he was carefully avoiding perjury. The evidence complicating this narrative is substantial. North's diaries reference multiple briefings with Reagan. Reagan's own diary, released years later, contains entries discussing the arms sales in detail. Former National Security Advisor Robert McFarlane testified that he briefed Reagan repeatedly. And the Tower Commission, Reagan's own investigative body, concluded that Reagan's management style created conditions where his staff felt empowered to act without explicit authorization, which is a polite way of saying he created plausible deniability. But one piece of evidence stands above the rest. In 1987, Reagan gave a televised address where he said, "A few months ago, I told the American people I did not trade arms for hostages. My heart and my best intentions still tell me that's true, but the facts and the evidence tell me it is not." Read that again. The President of the United States admitted that the facts contradicted what he had told the public. He just framed it as a conflict between his heart and the evidence, as though intentions could override documented reality. 11 administration officials were eventually convicted of crimes related to Iran-Contra. 11. This wasn't a conspiracy theory that fell apart under scrutiny. This was a criminal conspiracy that resulted in criminal convictions. Oliver North was convicted on 3 felony counts. John Poindexter was convicted on 5. Both convictions were later overturned on technical grounds related to their immunized congressional testimony being used improperly at trial, but the underlying facts were never disputed. They admitted what they did. The question was always about who authorized it. And then came the pardons. On Christmas Eve 1992, 6 weeks before he left office, President George H.W. Bush pardoned 6 Iran-Contra figures, including former Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger, who was about to go to trial. The special prosecutor, Lawrence Walsh, was furious. He noted that Weinberger's diaries, which Bush had claimed didn't exist, contained evidence that Bush himself, as vice president, had been far more involved than he publicly admitted. Walsh later wrote that the pardons undermined the principle that no man is above the law. Bush issued them anyway. The trial that might have answered the remaining questions about presidential knowledge never happened. Okay, so here's what the documentary record establishes beyond reasonable dispute. The Reagan administration sold weapons to Iran in violation of law and stated policy. The profits were diverted to fund the Contras in direct violation of the Boland Amendment. Documents were destroyed to obstruct the investigation. 11 officials were convicted, and presidential pardons ensured that the full truth would likely never emerge in a courtroom. What remains genuinely unresolved, did Reagan explicitly authorize the diversion to the Contras, or did his subordinates correctly interpret what he wanted without requiring direct orders? The shredded documents might have answered that. They're gone now. The institutional lesson is where this stops being history and starts being precedent. Iran-Contra demonstrated that a determined executive branch can conduct foreign policy in direct defiance of congressional restrictions, get caught, face investigations and even convictions, and still ensure that everyone involved walks away free. No president was impeached, no senior official served significant prison time. The message to future administrations was clear. The consequences for breaking the law, if you're powerful enough, are manageable. Critics of this interpretation argued that the system worked, the operations were exposed, investigated, prosecuted. Defenders of Reagan argue he was genuinely unaware of the specifics, but the pardons complicate any narrative of accountability. When the sitting president can pardon everyone involved before the full truth emerges at trial, the system's ability to hold power accountable has an obvious limit. The Iran-Contra scandal is sometimes called a constitutional crisis, but crises imply uncertainty about outcomes. What happened was more like a stress test that revealed the Constitution's enforcement mechanisms have a ceiling. Congressional subpoenas can be ignored if documents are shredded fast enough. Criminal convictions can be overturned or pardoned, and the American public, faced with dense procedural details and "I don't recall" testimony, eventually moves on. Oliver North is now a conservative media personality. John Poindexter later served in the George W. Bush administration. Elliott Abrams, who pleaded guilty to withholding information from Congress, was appointed to senior State Department positions in 2019. Every document in this story is publicly available. The Tower Commission report, the congressional investigation findings, North's notebooks, Reagan's diaries. The evidence isn't hidden. It's just that nobody in a position to enforce consequences wanted to follow it all the way to the top. Whether that represents a system protecting itself or a system with structural limits on accountability, that question is still open, and the precedent it set is still operating.
Subscribe for more. We release new videos every week.